How's everybody doing today? You know, you've heard me use the phrase ongoing colonial project or some variation of that. You might be asking yourself, what does Elise mean by that? Well, to put it as simply as I can, which isn't easy to do, what I mean by the ongoing colonial project is that we live in a nation whose legacy of settler colonialism it marks and continues to operate through our political, economic, social, and cultural systems and paradigms. Now, of course, it's not just us. This is absolutely true for other colonizer nations. So we continue to enact policies that are designed to subordinate indigenous peoples and lands here and abroad. The Standing Rock resistance and continued efforts to lay pipelines over and through indigenous territories. These vividly illustrate that fact. And the same is true about our support for U.S. corporations' unfettered access to the lands of other peoples in order to extract resources like, for example, precious metals. All of this is done for the benefit primarily of our nation's billionaire settler class. SpaceX and other fantasies of billionaire space travel. These are absolutely colonizing fantasies. They're promises to extend the ongoing project of colonialism through the universe. The writer Elliot Toss says that colonial domination shapes our ideas about race and strongly influences how people think about class, culture, gender, and sexuality. It influences also, I think, what people think about spirituality, about other sentient beings, about Earth, about our environment, and it really influences how we think about ourselves. And that's the stuff I focus on here in my brief videos. Colonial domination is a deep, deep malady within our spirits. Now, admittedly, that's a simplistic explanation for the ongoing colonial project. But I'm not here to try to teach a master class on colonialism and coloniality. However, I don't want to leave you all without any resources, so I'm including down below some links to a couple of articles that you can get started on so you can go down that rabbit hole for yourselves. All right, so I wanted to take a minute to talk about Egypt. Egypt occupies such an enormous space in spiritual communities, and for good reason. It's magnificent, it's magical, it has such spiritual power and significance. And so I think it makes sense that it just looms large in our imagination and even in our hopes and dreams. I wanted to talk about Egypt. I had taken a trip to Egypt a couple of months ago. I went with my daughter, Kiani. This is a shout out to you, and with my daughter's other mother. And we had a great trip. It was 2 weeks that I spent there. We spent there going all over Egypt and looking at the pyramids, the sphinxes, the monuments, all of that. It's just fantastic. And for most of the trip, we were guided by Egyptologists who were from Egypt, who were Egyptian. And I remember during one moment, we were driving in the countryside, and it's really just a desert. You go miles without seeing a gas station, so I had to plan my coffee drinking. Kind of the fact that you didn't see many cars on the road, and gas stations were like a billion miles away, sort of drove home the point of climate change, climate crisis is really produced by the West, truly produced by the West. Anyway, I veered off. So we're driving, and our guide at the time, Ayman, he's an Egyptologist, wonderful brother, was talking to us about so many things that we were seeing, including the landscape. And at some point, I just had to interrupt him. And I interrupted him to say this. I said, Ayman, when you talk about Egypt and the monuments and the building of the monuments and the hieroglyphics and all these wonderful things, I notice you always say, we. And he's like, yeah, that's right. And I said, and I let him know, I said, I appreciate that. Because in the West, Egypt is constructed as so much separate from, is distinct from the people who live here, right? Which is true. This is what happens with the ways in which the West has constructed Egypt. And it's good to remember that Egypt was a nation that was a place, rather, that the British claimed as its colony. And so, so how we talk about Egypt is very much influenced by that legacy of colonialism. He said, and he said, yeah, these are my great, 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 great grandparents, he would say. And he said, this stuff wasn't built by aliens. It wasn't built by folks from outer space. It was built by my ancestors. And so, to me, that was an important thing to hear, because I think within spiritual communities, with all our excitement around Egypt, I don't always get a sense that people sit with that history of the legacy of colonialism. And because we don't sit with that, often the spiritual expressions sound to me as re-articulations of colonial paradigms. And so we want to sit and really, be conscious of things that we're saying that might just sort of continue to reify Egypt as this space that's separate from Africa, separate from the people who live there, and somehow a larger part of Western culture. And these can be very subtle ways in which Egypt is colonized yet once again, right? So I think it's important that we sit with the question of whether our spiritual expressions might be re-articulations of colonial paradigms, and to ask ourselves, what impact that might be having on Egyptians, on the people there, like I'm, right? Ask yourself, is it possible you are contributing to the othering and subtle denigration of Africans when you talk about Egypt? And think through, what are the spiritual implications of speaking of Egypt as if it has nothing to do with the people who live there and their ancestors? As if its artifacts haven't been subject to Western plunder. And so, you might, these are dense conversations, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? We have lots of colonial shadows to work through. And so let's get into that density without getting overcome by it. But let's talk about it so that we can move through it and be responsible in the ways that we are explore and go down this path of spirituality. How we do spirituality matters. For me, this question of how we talk about Egypt is truly a question of how we care and show love for one another, right? Ayman's reaction to what I said should give us all some kind of pause. We should think back and say, okay, maybe let me think through how I'm embracing Egypt. And I'm not trying to get us not to. I was there in part because I just wanted to have this wonderful experience of this place. But I also had to check myself, because I was starting to sort of go down the rabbit hole of who created all this stuff, and and I should have known better. And I'm not averse to thinking about these sort of bigger questions because so much is being unearthed and revealed. But I don't want to do this in a harmful way, and I certainly don't want to reinvent colonialism through my spiritual practices. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I hope you like this content. Go ahead and share and like and subscribe if you do. And I would love to hear your thoughts about all this. And, if you've been to Egypt, I'd love to hear your experiences and share with us. All right, y'all, take great care and please be free. All right.